will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun, Cal.
The subject of Henry Cavill's Superman has been the center of a lot of conversations lately, with the DC Cinematic Universe doing a bit of a reset and moving on from Cavill as Superman. What better time to look back and see why the fans had such a fervor for his depiction of the Son of Krypton? Is it the stoic stare, the sleek and modern suit? No, I know what it is. It's those hairy abs, isn't it? So get your thirst traps ready and join us for today's DC Revisited as we try and figure it all out. So let's dive into Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. After Superman Returns failed to reignite the Superman character in any meaningful way, Warner Bros. Was faced with the decision of what to do with the franchise. Would they try another entry with Brandon Routh and see if it connected with audiences more, or would they simply put the series on ice? They decided that neither one of those options was very appealing and instead opted to reboot the franchise just a few years after Bryan Singer's failed attempt. And after seeing Sony have success rebooting their own Spider-Man series, it seemed like a viable option. So Warner wiped the slate clean and looked to start over with their caped hero. 2007's I Am Legend had teased a Batman vs Superman billboard, which had ignited rumors of a proposed film. Depending on who you ask, Batman vs Superman was happening, and this was their subtle way of seeing fan reaction. However, that seemed to just be rumors getting out of control because, after disliking how Superman was positioned in Superman Returns, studio execs made the decision to leave Batman out and simply focus on Supes instead. Plus, Christopher Nolan was still in the midst of his absurdly successful Dark Knight series, so there was no reason to rush anything. Instead, they let Nolan focus on Batman while they figured out a plan for Superman. Nolan's collaborator David S. Goyer told him about his own idea for a modern Superman film, which Nolan then pitched to Warner. They were so excited at continuing their working relationship that they immediately hired Nolan as a producer and Goyer as a writer. Having worked with him on Blade 2, Goyer approached Guillermo del Toro about taking on the film, but the director simply had no interest. Robert Zemeckis, Darren Aronofsky, and even Ben Affleck were approached about helming the feature. Having directed both 300 and Watchmen, Zack Snyder was proving himself to be quite the name in Hollywood when it came to adapting comics. With his unique eye, Warner and Nolan thought that he was the perfect fit for a new Superman, so he was hired for the job. With Marvel setting up their own cinematic universe, Warner felt it was well past time to set up their own. Unfortunately for them, Christopher Nolan didn't want his Batman trilogy involved, so whatever plans they had, it needed to be without Bale's Batman. So they set out to make a film that would serve not only as a reintroduction of the Superman character to audiences, but also set up other characters from DC's rich history. But in order to even think of building a whole universe, they first had to figure out the most important piece of their puzzle: the casting of Superman.
I'm on with the control tower. Colonel Hardy's on his way in and he's got Superman in tow.
Superman?
The alien, sir. That's what they're calling him, Superman.
The strangest aspect of Superman's casting for Man of Steel is that the person who ultimately got the role, Henry Cavill, had actually already won it for Superman Flyby. Unfortunately for Cavill though, that film was shelved, and he subsequently lost the role to Brandon Routh for Superman Returns. But when Warner had decided to revamp the series yet again, Cavill was right at the top of the list, along with Armie Hammer, Tyler Hoechlin, and Joe Manganiello. Ultimately though, Snyder thought that Cavill had the perfect look and the acting chops to pull it off, so he was cast. Cavill's approach was decidedly more dark and brooding than past versions, but it's undeniable how much physical presence the man has, which makes sense given that Henry spent 4 months on a strict training regime to bulk up for the part. Just take a look at the man with his shirt off and you may just confuse him with one of the warriors from 300. His muscles have muscles. And by the time he finally gets into the iconic suit, Cavill feels right at home. His Clark does leave a bit to be desired, but that seems more to do with Snyder's creative choices than Henry's.
What's the S stand for?
It's not an S. On my world, it means hope.
Well, here it's an S.
Oddly enough, it wasn't just Cavill who'd had past experiences with the property. Amy Adams had actually auditioned for Lois Lane 3 different times, having gone out for Mick G's Superman Flyby, as well as Superman Returns. Other actresses up for the part included Kristen Stewart, Olivia Wilde, and Mila Kunis. But with Adams having massive success with films like The Fighter and The Master, she was a massive get. So the studio quickly locked her down. While her Lois Lane has been divisive amongst fans, it's hard to deny her acting talent.
If you love these people so much, you can mourn for them.
For the role of the main antagonist, General Zod, Snyder knew he needed someone that had the screen presence to strike fear in the viewer with just a look. And there was no one better suited for that role than Michael Shannon. There's an intensity with his performance that makes him one of the best parts of the entire film. Daniel Day-Lewis and Viggo Mortensen were both considered for the part, but it's hard to imagine anyone but Shannon in the role. He's the perfect foil for Henry's Superman. Don and Ursa were so memorable in Donner's Superman as Zod's cronies that it's a little disappointing to see them replaced. Instead, we have Fiora Ul, as played by Anja Trawa. She's very similar to Ursa in appearance, but unfortunately isn't quite as memorable. Alice Eve and Diane Kruger were both considered for the part, with Gal Gadot even being offered the role. Thankfully for her though, she was pregnant and had to decline, opening her up for future heroic roles. Sean Penn and Clive Owen were both considered for Jor-El, the Kryptonian father of Superman. Snyder wanted someone that could match the gravitas of former Jor-El actor Marlon Brando. While a seemingly impossible task, Russell Crowe was cast in the part. This version of Jor-El has considerably more to do than just wonderful monologues, even getting to take part in a bit of the action. Ayelet Zerer took on the role of Kal-El's biological mother, Lara. Julia Ormond was originally cast in the role, but dropped out shortly before filming began. Connie Nielsen was also in negotiations, but she was later cast in Wonder Woman, so it worked out for her. For the roles of Clark's Earth parents, Kevin Costner and Diane Lane were cast as Jonathan and Martha Kent. Given how much these two are Clark's emotional anchors, the casting of such Americana actors made sense. Audiences were able to attach to them without the movie needing to spend a ton of time setting them up. That's what casting such actors can do for your film. Laurence Fishburne also appeared as Perry White, head of the Daily Planet. Man of Steel started filming in Chicago on August 1st, 2011. While 3D filming was a massive trend at the time, Snyder opted to shoot the film in 2D and later convert it into 3D, as he felt the 3D cameras would be too limiting. They filmed over a 6-month period, moving from Illinois to California, then wrapping things up in Vancouver. While there is a considerable amount of CGI in the film, a ton of the effects were done practically, with an impressive flying rig being created. Surprisingly, despite him being the main villain in most Superman films, they made the decision not to include Lex Luthor here. This was probably the right decision as there's already a lot going on, but his exclusion just feels weird. Seeing as this is a reboot of the Superman story, we get a lot of the same origins, such as getting a front row seat to the destruction of Krypton. But Zod is even more of a terrorist, and we rarely get to see how much he hates Superman's father, Jor-El. But as we all know, Kal-El gets shipped off into space before his planet is destroyed. He then grows up as Clark Kent on a farm in Kansas, only for Zod to find him on Earth and seek retribution. As far as story beats, there's nothing introduced here that treads terribly new ground, but there's plenty of insane action set pieces to help satiate those looking for some explosions. For the design of the Superman costume, Snyder wanted a more modern aesthetic and thought the red trunks that the hero usually wore didn't quite look right. James Acheson and Michael Wilkinson teamed up on the design and development, and proceeded to give it considerably darker tones. They also redesigned the massive S that adorns his chest, making it much sleeker. The Kryptonian armor that Zod wears proved to be too bulky for a practical outfit, so instead they opted to create the armor using CGI. This allowed Shannon much more range of movement and further establishes his strength. Weta Digital worked on the visual effects for the film, and they provide some truly stunning scenes. Snyder opted for a documentary style during the action scenes, which means there were zooms and shaky cam in order to ground the action a bit. This filmmaking style, combined with the destruction of Metropolis in the film's finale, leads to some truly awe-inspiring moments. Wanting to continue the success they'd had with him on Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, Hans Zimmer was brought in to compose the film's score. Despite John Williams' Superman March being an absolutely iconic theme for the character, Zimmer opted not to use it, instead going for an entirely original composition. While it certainly has its moments, the Williams score is sorely missed. Man of Steel released in the United States on June 14, 2013, and brought in over $116 million on its opening weekend. It would go on to tally up $668 million at the worldwide box office. The film had a massive IMAX push, which helped to make the movie even more profitable than the prior Superman entry. Critics were still mixed, giving it a 56% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, saying that Man of Steel's exhilarating action and spectacle can't fully overcome its detours into generic blockbuster territory. Thankfully though, despite critics not liking it, fans were much more forgiving, with Henry Cavill getting a massive fandom in the process. There's been a lot of criticism levied at Man of Steel over the years. In the wake of the release, many critics were upset at the overt city destruction going on in the third act. It seemed as though superhero movies were simply about destroying cities and setting up a massive body count. It didn't help that Superman himself, a character who will do anything to save as many as possible, is single-handedly responsible for many deaths in the film, even if they're inadvertent. That's not even getting into the final confrontation with Zod, which sees Supes murder him in order to prevent him from killing a group of cowering humans. This has been the subject of a lot of debate over the superhero film and is considered the beginning of the end of Snyder's vision of the series. But with the recent Flash trailer, it appears as though we'll see a return to the Kryptonian incursion, with General Zod appearing as the main bad guy. So if anything, the Snyderverse will be able to end where it all began. When it comes to Man of Steel actors who have been in other superhero projects, there's been a lot. But thankfully, most of that will be covered in our future videos on Batman vs Superman and Justice League. Russell Crowe appeared in Thor: Love and Thunder as Zeus, while Laurence Fishburne was Dr. Bill Foster in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Then Ayelet Zerer appeared as Kingpin's wife Vanessa in Netflix's Daredevil. These were the only 3 actors to have appeared in some kind of future superhero projects, which is surprising since this features so many heavy hitters in the acting world. While we've discussed many different superhero films over the years, we've yet to see 2 of our massive heroes truly duke it out in an epic battle. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, and that's a story for next time. Join us, same movie time, same movie channel.